The weather was beautiful, the sun was shining brightly, enveloping everything with its rays, trees, houses, gardens. The street was quiet and peaceful. In the middle of the still, deserted street there were only two people, a boy and a girl. The girl looked lovely, a pretty sun-colored sundress, blonde hair gathered in two ponytails, holding bows like flowers. And a dark-haired, tall young man, much older than her, with a smiling, kind and handsome face. He offered her a trade. She would give him what she had in her hand for a lollipop. The child hastily agreed, but demanded 2 lollipops in return. The young man agreed, but did not fulfill his promise. When he got what he wanted, he simply turned around and walked away. The child cried, but he ignored it. The boy was looking at the small blue ball that he had unfairly taken away and wondering how much such a valuable thing was worth. Suddenly, the ball began to show some activity. It started to change color from blue to red, glowing brightly and hurting his fingers. The boy started screaming in pain and surprise. His face showed signs of fear and panic, of not understanding what was happening and what he should do. But no matter how hard he tried to get rid of the bullet, it kept on sticking to his fingers, as if it were intoxicatingly digging into his skin. The young man's struggles and unsuccessful movements caused him to lose his footing and fall to the ground. He lay there, clutching his head, wondering why the day was so strange and unlucky. Looking up at the bird in the sky, he saw a strange flickering of purple and blue that seemed to be swirling around him, and the boy was again confused, because he did not understand what was happening. A blue light flashed around him, creating the impression of a vortex and a stream of powerful energy, similar to microcircuits and circuit boards that are interconnected. Everything calmed down. His eyes were hurting badly, and he had no idea what had happened all this time. The boy cautiously and slowly got up, putting his hand to his aching eye, and then he saw the light. He had lost that strange bead. Unimaginable changes took place in his appearance. The left eye had a black bullseye and a bright blue pupil that shone. The young man began to look around hastily. Turning around, the young man saw a terrifying scene, a rock slide that had collapsed onto the road and fell on a passing car, causing a fire. But it wasn't quite like that, he realized when he put his palm over his changed eye and saw nothing but an empty road. At the same time, he saw the car that he had just dreamed of, all in flames and smashed under the rubble. The boy stared at it in astonishment, and realized that his left eye was showing him the future. Putting aside all other thoughts and trying not to think about such miracles, he ran out onto the road and started waving his arms, demanding that the car stop immediately. The boy realized that the driver was not trying to stop the car and started shouting in a demanding voice to stop. He focused his attention on the car's actions, as the boy's main goal was to save a human life. The car began to slow down. It abruptly stopped almost at the boy's feet, who was frightened and thought that the car would not stop. Angry, dissatisfied women's cries began to be heard from the car. It is understandable, it was close to an accident. A young girl got out of the vehicle. She was beautiful, had golden eyes and short blonde hair. She was eager to hear the young man's explanation of why he had acted stupidly and dangerously. Parabiko immediately began to explain the reason for his too without hesitation. He tried to explain that a landslide was going to happen next, proving it with words. But the girl, not believing his words, kicked him, but he dodged it in time, which made her surprised and wondered if he was studying martial arts. Immediately behind them, many large stones fell. They both stared at the spot. The girl was surprised that the boy was telling the truth and not trying to trick them or do something bad. She started to ask him how he knew this would happen, but their conversation was interrupted. Another girl appeared behind them. She was years older than her friend, but she was even more beautiful. She had beautiful pink eyes and hair that was much longer than the other girls, and her face was charming and kind. The beautiful girl turned to her companion, named Madison, and asked her to stop screaming and demanding something from the handsome, young man, because thanks to him they were still alive and well. The girls introduced themselves. Madison, previously mentioned by her friend, and a pink-haired girl named Emily. They began to express their gratitude for saving their lives. The boy was embarrassed by the sincerity and kindness in Emily's gentle voice. He looked at her appearance, thinking how gorgeous she was. Madison was driving, trying to find out at least something about the young man, asking questions. But he didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the pink-eyed stranger, studying her features and body. But the golden-eyed girl managed to get his attention by addressing him as, "Hey!" She remarked that they still did not know his name, and also for the fact that he had been staring at her friend for a long time, asking if he had fallen in love with her. The young man, embarrassed by the remark about his long stares at the man, stammered to introduce himself, saying his name was Alfie. Emily blushed at the young man's inquisitive stares and the girl's remark. The girls gave the young man a ride to the place where he asked them to drop him off, and then suddenly said goodbye. Madison was a little worried about Alfie and asked if he was okay. They reminded him of the lives he had saved and left their numbers as a token of their gratitude, asking him to call them if anything happened that they could help with. He politely agreed and left. On the way, he rejoiced in the ability of his left eye, because he somehow managed to see Emily's body through his clothes. On his way home, he noticed a woman, about 45 years old, in the crowd, from whom he rents a house. His attention was drawn to the bag she was carrying. With his supernatural left eye, the young man saw in it, through the fabric, a strange thing that resembled the ball now in his eye. It also shone with a blue glow, but had a completely different shape. Alfie was terrified of this strangeness. It seemed ominous to him. He could not understand what it was and how it could emit an incomprehensible aura. He watched and followed her, wondering where she was taking this thing. So she went into the pawnshop, and the guy followed her. The woman argued with the pawnbroker. She was not satisfied with the price offered by the man. Shouting and screaming, she argued that this thing was more valuable than the amount he offered, because it was a collection from the Republic of China that her father had collected. The receiver reacted calmly and began to explain why he had quoted such a reasonable price. The reason was the material, which consisted of clay and yellow granules that are hard-kneaded and poured into a mold. At this point, a boy who was watching from the side interrupted their conversation. He feigned curiosity and asked the aunt to show him what she was selling, asking if he could see it. Immediately, before she could refuse, he offered to buy the goods from her. She began to coo about paying the rent, but still agreed. The stone that the seller was holding attracted Alfie's left eye, which helped to get rid of her doubts. The boy immediately said that he would pay for the apartment later. And he started talking about the blueberry stone, explaining that he wanted to buy it because the stone made him fall in love with it at first sight. The boy asked the landlady for the price. She told him the price, but it was almost 4 times higher than the one given by the seller. The boy was surprised by such an expensive amount. The boy got the impression that the woman raised the price only because she thought he would not be able to pay for it. But he didn't think so. Alfie agreed, pretending that her terms were fair, saying that he had expected a higher price. The pawnbroker intervened, asking why he had decided to help her. The aunt, afraid that the seller would say an acceptable price for the stone, immediately negotiated with Alfie. She began to speak in a rude tone so that he would not dare to mock her and pay immediately, threatening that he would have no place to live. Despite her words about eviction, the guy agreed to pay immediately and asked her to follow him. She was in a stupor of surprise, standing there with her eyes wide open. He spent his last money, with great hope that it was not in vain. Sitting alone, he looked at the stone, found a knife and began to chip away at it to get the marvel out. Alfie easily got the jade out. However, he cut his finger with it, probably because the technology had regressed. Within a minute, the jade began to act. It began to shine with a blue glow, and around it were similar chips that were in the bead. A connection was established between his eye and this object in the form of lightning. He was enveloped from head to toe in the radiance, which began to swirl around him in circles. This made him feel strange, his body relaxed, and he felt light. Around Alfina's hand, light began to swirl like steam coming from a cup of hot tea. These ropes began to wrap around the finger with the wound, and instantly it healed. The guy was overwhelmed with emotion. Had his left eye gained the ability to heal? Without hesitation, the young man took a picture of the tzatziki he found and began searching the internet for information about it. And he came across an ad that said that the buyers wanted to buy such a thing, and they offered a fairly large sum of money. The guy saw this and started making a lot of noise out of surprise and joy that he would become rich. Continuing to make noise and waving his hands, he had already chosen what he would spend it on, of course, a Ferrari sports car. Alfie didn't even plan to think about why this worthless thing was so valuable. He immediately ran to the store so that he could sell it for the highest price, blinded by money and the desire to buy an expensive car. He asked how much the store boss would buy his priceless item for. Since the shopkeeper knew a lot about goods, he immediately realized that the boy's product was jade. Thinking that the boy did not understand prices and did not know what such things cost, although he was right, he began to make up reasons that were not true, such as that the stone was of poor quality, so he would buy it for 5,000, which was almost the same price as the boy had paid. But for the buyer, things were not so simple. The guy already knew how much the stone should cost, thanks to the internet, so he decided to take the man for a ride, pretending that he didn't like the price, so that he could change his mind. The boss started calling out to the young man and asking him to stop. As a more effective way to stop his important client, he shouted after him a price that was 10 times higher. The boy stopped, interested in the price he heard, and asked if he had heard correctly. The owner said that this was a reasonable price for his jade. While the client sat and enjoyed the tea the owner offered him, the owner examined the jade in detail with a magnifying glass in his hands, saying that the stone was quite good. Although the jade was beautiful, the boss could not afford to buy it, but he knew someone who could buy it for a decent price. After he made the offer, he immediately called his friend, inviting him to see something very worthwhile. The friend was surprised to find out if this was true, and the owner refused to explain, telling him to leave as soon as possible. But the other man warned the boss, threatening that he would regret it if he came in vain and saw nothing interesting. The boss ignored this and advised him to take Master Charlie because he was the best in the business. After finishing the conversation, the man began to tell him with a smile on his face that his friend had agreed to look at the jade. He also advised him that if his friend liked it, he should not be afraid to ask for more money, because the man was absolutely rich. The boy replied that he wanted his jade pendant to be sold at a real price. After a while, the same rich man came into the room with the master. The master was an ordinary adult man, about 45 years old, with a short beard and glasses. But the rich man was quite handsome. He had gray hair, golden eyes, a handsome face, and was tall and slim. As he walked toward his friend and future client, he exuded charisma, power, and influence. The fat boss ran up to the handsome William, happy to see him. But he ignored this and got straight to the point, asking where the thing he had praised on the phone was. The man pointed to Alfie, who had already gotten up from his seat, and said that it was the young man's. William approached the boy and with a serious and relaxed, rather bored face asked him to take out and show him the thing they had been talking about for so long. The boy immediately held out his hand with the stone on it. Mr. Charlie took the jade from my hands and could not say a word in surprise, his face twisted and puzzled with his mouth open. And then his face changed in an instant. He pressed the stone to his cheek, which was swollen with care and delight. He exuded an aura of admiration and love. After the craftsman left bouncing off with the goods, the rich man hastened to reassure Alfie, explaining that Uncle Charlie is always like that when he sees something good. William agreed with the fat man's words. This jade pendant was a beautiful thing. He said that just by looking at it, he liked it. So the major would pay for it generously, and would not mind making friends with the young man. The young man asked his boss why he hadn't introduced them to each other yet. The boss started the introduction by introducing himself. His name was Louis. Then he formally introduced the rich man, William, from Alfie. After getting to know each other, William said that he and the guy were now friends. Since it was already evening, the handsome man offered to come to his house and have dinner, since he lived nearby. The fat man was all for it. A wealthy young man brought a friend and a new companion to his home. The house was different from the others, although all the houses on his street were not poor. The house looked charming in its own way, rich, pompous, and powerful. But in addition to it, there was a spacious, beautiful, and harmonious garden with many plants and trees, ornamental shrubs, a well-mowed lawn, and a cherry blossom tree. In the midst of all this harmony, there was a stylish terrace where you could spend your free time with friends. Alfie was in great amazement, wandering around the huge house and looking at the interior, which was so fascinating. The owner of the house invited the guests to the table. They waited while dinner was being prepared, sitting at a wide table and talking. Around them was a gorgeous interior, a large chandelier, a panoramic window with elegant curtains. The young man asked his new friend how much he would buy his jade pendant for. William asked him to address him by his first name and answer his questions. At a minimum, the jewelry is worth at least 500,000 yuan. But if the guy has any problems, he can give the buyer his bank card number, and he will transfer 200,000 yuan in advance, because he needs to discuss the details with his family to make the full payment. The young man was happy because it was a lot of money. He assured his friend that he had no problem. And he hurriedly dictated his card number, as if he might change his mind at any second. Louis asked the young man what they should do. He suggested that he send him the bank accounts for convenience. But that was unnecessary. William had memorized Alfie's dictated bank number. He assured any guest, with a smile, that he would make them feel at home. After all, they were like brothers to each other now. The boy agreed, wondering how a friend could have such a wonderful character. Suddenly, his phone vibrated in his jeans pocket. Pulling it out, he read a message that said he had transferred money to a bank account, and he was surprised at the quickness of the action. As he walked down the corridor of the luxurious house, he looked at his new friends and dreamed that these kind people would become close to him. Since they had already finished discussing their issues and plans, Alfie offered to leave first. The owner decided to walk him out and told him to come and visit him without hesitation, explaining that it was hard to meet someone on the street who came here to talk. As they passed the garden, they saw 4 men sitting on the terrace, discussing something. The young gentleman recognized Elder Joe among the group and asked him if he had much time to spare to see William's father. The old man told him that he had something to brag about to his father. His appearance was striking. He had long gray eyebrows and a beard, and a short mustache, and he was bald and wore a gray jacket. Major replied that he also had something to show, and he introduced his new friend to Alfie, putting him in front of him. He did not stop there. He began to show off the jade column he had bought from the same friend. The old man was surprised, because this jade was not so simple. William told him that he had not decided how much he wanted to ask for it, so if Joe wanted to, he could help him set an adequate price. The fat man told him to try the stone for texture, asking if it was a good color, boasting that he had discovered it all. The rich man recalled that he had not introduced the young man to the other newly arrived guests. The man in the classic gray suit with black tie is the next secretary of Zanan City. Next to him is a gray-haired, bearded man, wearing a white shirt and a dark gray cape, who is the director of Company XX. The principal took the jade in his hands and said sharply and loudly that it was the return of Sebastian. Joe turned to the director, named Joshua, and asked him if he was sure that this was the Sebastian that Sam was carrying with him when he secretly visited Jiangnan, which is a jade piece belonging to Benjamin. Fat Louis did not understand which Sebastian we were talking about. However, our boy did, and he explained that when Sam was still young, he secretly went to Weifu, where he met Catherine, who was known as the first beautiful girl in Jiangnan. Over time, they began a relationship, and he gave her a piece of jade he had been saving and asked her to bring the stone to Kyoto to find it. But in the end, there was nothing else. As for the jade shard, the department in charge of the Qing butler has a special record. The place where the piece of jade would go was also recorded under Sam's dictation. The elder gave the young man a puzzled look, as there are not many young people who know these references. He asked the young man how he knew this. He replied that it was a remote village in Qingshui City, Luo County, Jiangnan City. Zhou said that he had been to Qingshui many times, and with great curiosity, he asked if Alfie knew Dawang Village, Qingshui City. The boy was puzzled by this question, because he lived in the village of Davang. He asked if the old man had any friends in the village. The boy's words caught Zhou off guard, and his face showed shock. His eyes opened wide and his jaw dropped. He asked again to make sure he heard correctly. But before he could confirm, he asked if the boy knew a man named Ethan. Ethan's house was in the eastern part of the village, and it was already looking terrible, old, and shabby. When the boy said that this was his family, Ethan was Alfie's grandfather, who adopted him, the boy began to ask if he knew his family. He asked him if his grandfather hadn't told him about the village he grew up in. The young man became nervous because he did not understand what was being said. After a short pause, the old man assured him that there was nothing to worry about and started laughing out loud, recalling how his grandfather had talked about the boy and called him a monkey. His grandfather had never called the boy a monkey in front of him, so the boy was a little embarrassed. Zhou started to get up from the cushioned couch, saying how hard it was to meet an old friend. He walked over to the boy and hugged him. While he hugged him, he said that since his grandfather was no longer alive, in the future he wanted them to communicate as if they were family and that Alfie could contact him whenever he needed to. While everyone stood there in shock and confusion, they continued to talk. The elder gave his contact number and assured the boy not to be afraid to contact him, explaining that he and his grandfather had been friends for many years. The boy was excited and agreed, calling Zhou his grandfather. Everyone went about their business, and the boys went to a cafe. Sitting at a table outside, they talked animatedly, surrounded by the noise of people. The first to order was a rich man. He already knew everyone here because he often came here. He asked the boss for a couple of skewers and a few cans of drinks. He called him Brother Will and recommended that he try the green beans first. Meanwhile, old Joe sat wondering if Ethan had told his grandson anything about the village of Davang. This place of Davang is not easy. But Alfie is a simple man, and an interesting young man. The elder tried to stop thinking about it. Since his grandfather hadn't told him anything, he certainly wanted his grandson to live a good and happy life. Since he had already passed away, Joe promised him that he would take care of him. The waitress brought the boys their order. She looked familiar to Alfie. She reminded him of Emma from school. She was called the flower of Jiangsu University. He had heard that she was from a good family, but why she was working here, he did not understand. While he was staring at the girl, trying to figure out if it was her, Louis noticed him staring at the girl. The fat man took action. He complimented the beauty on her irresistibility, and asked her if she had a lover. He explained his question by saying that he wanted to introduce her to his friend. He pointed to a young man, and having jolted him out of his thoughts, began to introduce him to the girl. He was wealthy, young, tall and handsome. Alfie was embarrassed by the unexpected introduction from his friend, and he looked at him, giving him puzzled looks with rosy cheeks. Thoughts rushed through his head, making it impossible to understand what the fat man was doing without his consent. Who would start talking to a stranger about love so directly? Poor Alfie. The guy began to make excuses to Emma, calling it a bad joke of his friend. Meanwhile, he scolded his friend for talking like that. The girl was also embarrassed by these words, but ignoring this situation, she asked the guys if they needed anything else to order. Louis asked the waitress to bring a plate of gorgeous flowers. Louis began to ask him why he was reddening, resembling a monkey's butt. He joked with his friend, calling him an innocent little boy, while he looked away, not knowing what to say. He advised the young man to act. If he liked her, he should follow her. There was nothing to be ashamed of. He asked if his parents had taught him that if you meet a noble woman, you will have a good relationship. He also wondered how Alfie knew the young woman. The young man denied that he liked her. She was just a flower of the school where he had only seen her in a photo once. At this time, the boss brought their additional order, the flowers they wanted, blooming and rich. The boy was the first to try it, It was quite tasty and tough. He couldn't understand what it was trying to taste, this dish. Puffy began to explain that it was made from chicken, giving him a clue to a song Jay played called Chrysanthemum Terrace. The young man started spitting out what he was chewing and yelling at the boys how they could let him taste it. The boys laughed loudly at their friend and asked him why he was spitting it out, as it was a very expensive part, the most expensive part of the chicken body. The atmosphere in their company was great. They had fun and were comfortable spending time together. The next picture didn't look so fun anymore. The waitress, Emma, was approached by 3 healthy and dangerous men who tried to persuade her to have a drink together, wanted to get to know the beauty, surrounded her so that she had nowhere to escape from them. They acted like wild animals that surrounded their prey. She was screaming for them to get away from her, and if not, she would call the police. Her eyes were filled with fear, but she spoke with confidence. Thanks to her screaming, Alfie heard and recognized her voice and immediately rushed to her aid as the situation was getting worse. The guy ran up to the girl and started yelling, demanding an explanation for what they were doing. He introduced himself as her boyfriend as she stared at him in shock. The boy continued to block the beauty with himself, preventing the pagans from reaching her. They were outraged, began to shout at him, asking who he was to interfere with the elders, and mocked him as if the little boy wanted to pretend to be a hero who was saving a beautiful girl. The restless ones began to chase him away and asked him to mind his own business. But the guy did not pay attention to their words. He came closer to Emma and began to calm the frightened girl, saying that he was there and everything would be fine. The young woman suggested calling the police, but the guy didn't think it was necessary because he was sure he could handle these drunken bastards. The villains grouped up to be ready for a fair and just fight 3 against 1. But our little hero also had advantages. He had a supernatural left eye that would help in battle by showing the future. Isn't that convenient? The young man activated his eyes and waited for an attack from them. The first guy in the purple shirt rushed at the boy, and while he was running, he threw rude words at his opponent, demanding that they stop these concerts. Then he tried to hit Alfie, but failed. The guy crouched down, thus dodging the blow. He immediately countered with a punch, hitting the attacker in the chest, whose face was disgustingly contorted in pain, and the air was knocked out of his mouth. After that, he fell to the ground, clutching his hand to the place that hurt. The other 2 stood there, staring at their friend who had been so easily whipped with just 1 blow. The boy was angry that his friends were standing by and doing nothing. He called them rude names and ordered them to attack the boy. The boys immediately ran at Alfie. They continued to consider him a weak opponent, teasing him with questions about how many he could beat. The man with the short hair did not let up, threatening that the young man would not be able to escape from them. As if he was going to, the guy in the blue t-shirt agreed with his friend, and they still had time to wag their tongues while running. The bald guy was the first to try to hit him. His attempt was unsuccessful. Our hero kicked him in the ribs, and then added a fist to his face. Only after he had beaten the bald man down, a guy in a t-shirt took a swing at him. He used a spinning wheel trick, thinking that Alfie would not have time to react. But the guy dodged, leaning back, then he caught the attacker's leg and knocked him down. He fell to the floor. He could not understand how he did it. Alfie stood there with his breath caught in his throat, looking at the guys he had defeated with gambling eyes, his face full of words. Well, is that all you got? The 6-second foresight of his left eye turned out to be really useful. He delivered the final kick to the guy in the t-shirt. He didn't seem like a little hero to them anymore. Emma was mesmerized as she stood behind the strong man. She admired her rescuer's courage. It was unexpected to see his skill in a fight and his strength. Approaching him, she expressed her gratitude for the way he had handled the incident. The young man assured the waitress that it was no trouble and he was happy to lend a hand. His cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and he was pleasantly surprised that the school flower knew his name. His guess was that perhaps he had made a good impression on her, although it was impossible. William and Louis ran as fast as they could as soon as the boss told them that their friend had gotten into a fight with some thugs. When they came running, they saw the defeated hooligans lying on the floor. The fat man, out of breath, made a remark about the friend, because he hadn't told his friends anything, hadn't warned them that he was going to perform heroic deeds. They were frightened, worried that something would happen to him, so they called people together. Alfie was amused by his friend's words and said that he hadn't expected it himself, but he was able to deal with the rude people and chalk it up to just plain luck. Behind him, the flower spoke, saying that it had called its friend and asked him to pick it up. Thanking him again, she said goodbye to the savior, her face shining with kindness and sincerity. The boys returned to the table and began to bore the young man with their confident but unreasonable questions about his liking for Emma. The young man did not think he liked her because they had just met a couple of hours ago. But it didn't matter, he was more interested in why there were so many people around them, surrounding them and turning their backs on them. Will tried to explain, but he was interrupted by the noise of a car that arrived at the establishment on the vapors, a gray beetle that screamed that he had brought trouble with him. The offended boys, who had been taught by only one person, called for reinforcements. Standing behind the newcomers, they shouted that this time the young man would not succeed. Once again, they were wrong about the course of action and the outcome. The hooligans were surrounded by people standing near the boys' table, and it was clear from their fierce and unfriendly faces that the villains would not have it easy. This group of men was called by the major to help Alfie in the fight. He had thought that he had bothered these men in vain, but it turned out to be quite the opposite, which pleased him. There were screams and sounds of beatings in the street, and the men quickly dealt with each loser. The leader of these fair and strong men approached the major to say goodbye. Will thanked his friend, but asked him not to leave them just yet. He wanted to introduce his two friends, Olive, whom he had recently met, and his brother Jacob. The boy was only too happy to meet them. Jacob got a business card for his new friend, told him that he could contact him in the future with any problems, just one call and the problems were gone. He said, "Since you are a friend of my friend, you are also a friend to me." The business card said that Jay worked as a manager in a real estate company. Alfie also said that he could rely on him in the future. The boys were already going home, having had a good time, and Will was leading Louis by the hand because he couldn't stand on his own, although he was proving otherwise. Alfie said goodbye and promised to contact them tomorrow. The rich man wished him a safe trip home and promised to show him a nice place the next day. After a hard and busy day, the guy went home in a good mood. He became a rich man, not to mention 5 million. Alfie was thinking about what he would spend the money on, but first and foremost, his main goal was to go to Shanshui to resign. He decided to buy a house and a car, which was a good idea. Behind him, he heard fast footsteps coming toward him. He turned around and saw a girl dressed in black clothes with a knee wound on her stomach, gray-blue hair and blue eyes. She was running away from men who were obviously hunting her. Alfie watched. He didn't understand what was happening, while the girl was running right at him. Many questions were racing through his mind, such as whether he should intervene and help her, and what if she turned out to be a bad person and he made things worse. When she was a few steps away, he smelled trouble. His powers had failed and he began to back away from her. Before he could get far, the stranger ran at him, knocking him down, grabbing his neck and swinging to strike him. The girl accepted the hand from her neck as soon as she realized that it was a civilian and he could not harm her, but the fact that a citizen was involved was bad. The lady in black acted quickly, pulling out a flask of blue substance and ordering the boy to take it to Chief Rani of the Jiangnan Police Command. She also told him to hurry up. The woman's pursuers ran up to them and surrounded them, along with the boy, threatening that they would not be able to escape. The man in the suit realized that the girl had given the flask to the boy, and he said he would deal with him himself, while the other two ordered him to deal with the young woman. The lady turned to the boy and apologized for getting him into this trouble. Alfie wasn't going to sit there and wait. He got into a fighting stance, and a bad guy in a suit stood in front of him with a knife in his hand. The lady turned to the boy and apologized for getting him into this trouble. Alfie wasn't going to sit there and wait. He got into a fighting stance, and a bad guy in a suit with a knife in his hand stood in front of him. The attacker was as fast as a snake. He swung the knife right at the guy's head, and Alfie barely dodged it, but the blade cut off some of his hair. The boy was amazed at his speed, and if his supernatural left eye hadn't foreseen the next 6 seconds, he would have been wounded on the face. The enemy was equally surprised. His speed was impossible to dodge, and he suspected that he was in league with the young woman. He prepared a stronger and more insidious attack for Alfie, believing that he would not dodge. The bad guy in the suit continued to strike and strike one after another, but the young man managed to dodge them. A lot of time passed, and both fighters were exhausted. The enemy was furious. He thought he was powerful, but after the fight with the young man, everything changed. He failed to land a single blow. Alfie teased the enemy, provoking him by asking if this was his maximum. Mockingly hinting that he was a loser, he asked him to give his all in the fight. The leader of the enemies was convinced that our young man was not an ordinary person, that he was his partner. The enemies returned to the place they had come from to wait for reinforcements. Looking after them, the guy breathed out a sigh of relief. The blows were too close and the situation was risky, but it seems he saved the stranger. But the girl was in bad shape, despite the wound. Exhausted from running and fighting with a group of guys, she fell to the ground because her legs could no longer hold her. She pressed her hand to her wound to stop the red discharge from her stomach. The guy was scared and ran up to her, asking how she was feeling, and he assured her that he would call a doctor so that she would not worry about her life. But she refused, begging him not to call a doctor or the police or anyone else, because they would find out. She reminded him to remember to give the things she gave him to Chief Ronnie. The guy did not want to leave the girl alone in agony, so he took her to his apartment without saying a word. A long time after the young people left the dark alley, the enemy came with their reinforcements, but they did not find the two. They immediately went in search to prevent them from getting far. The head of the group wanted to find them, because the consequences would not be safe for them to live in peace. The stranger was lying on the bed with her hand pressed to her wound. Her face was contorted in pain. She asked the boy to help her put a bandage on her vagina. The boy was unwilling to do so because they were not a couple. He meant that she should not undress in front of him because she might lose her honor and nobility. The blue-eyed woman said that she would not resist him and that it did not matter in this situation, because without his help she could die and go to a better place. The guy pressed his lips together and warned her that he would now take off her outerwear, which was in the way, and that her main task was to not move so as not to increase the flow of red. While Alfie was preparing to treat the wound, the girl asked if her rescuer knew any martial arts, and was eager to learn how he had defeated his opponent. He told her that he knew a little about it and asked her name, introducing himself first. She also introduced herself. Her name is Rain, which means a cloud of happiness. The guy bandaged her wound, but it didn't look good, too dangerous. She can't stay like this for long, it won't end well. He remembered that his capable left eye could heal him, but he wasn't sure if he could do it with the others. He gritted his teeth and activated his eye, begging for it to work, Sure enough, the girl was enveloped in a blue and shimmering glow that began to gather on her body, near where she had been wounded. Everything went well, he managed to heal her. But Alfie looked terribly unhealthy and sluggish. He turned pale, and bruises appeared under his eyes. He felt very exhausted. He gathered his thoughts and thought that he urgently needed to find a place to rest for a while. Morning came. The guy woke up in his chair, realizing that he had passed out from fatigue yesterday. He got up, the bed was made, there was no one else in his apartment, and he decided that maybe he had a little too much to drink with his friends last night. But it doesn't matter, the important thing for today is to get fired from his job. Alfie came to his workplace. It was a big hangar. When he went inside, he met his colleague, who was standing with some papers and smoking. The colleague said something hinting, with a sneering face, that Director John wanted to talk to him about something. But the guy ignored him and walked silently past him. The guy did not tell him anything, because he knew that he would report anything to the director. A great country will surely take a lot of good things. Just think about these words of his colleague. The young man was once again happy that he had become wealthy, which allowed him to stay here longer to play unfair games with his colleagues one last time. His colleague had an unpleasant and sinister aura about him, and he gave Alfie angry and disgruntled looks. He believed that only a young man could fight him, that the boy could not understand his mistakes. He believed that the boy was weak and could not play games with Peter. Peter didn't mind playing with Alfie for the rest of his life. The young man was already standing in the director's office. He asked him if he was ready to apologize to his colleague Henry, the same unpleasant colleague he met at the beginning, at the morning meeting. The boy, feigning sincerity and remorse for his actions, confirmed that he wanted to do so. He would go down to everyone and publicly apologize to his colleague at the morning meeting. The workers stood in a row while the director made an announcement. He said that before the meeting started, they had something to say. They announced that Gary and Alfie had recently almost had a fight over work, just before the holiday, because of an incident. As the young man realized his mistakes, he would apologize to his colleague in public today. The director asked the young man to come forward and say it in front of everyone. He agreed and did so. His colleagues were surprised by this statement because they did not think he should be the one to apologize. Gary stood there and watched, his expression arrogant and defiant. After greeting everyone, the guy began to play by his own rules. He said that he had done nothing in this situation with Gary for which he should apologize. No one, except the director and his colleague, was surprised by this, because the guy was speaking from the heart. The guy continued to talk, saying that if he hadn't been restrained by his other colleagues, he would still have beaten Gary. He assured me that if he had another chance, he would not regret it. He then turned to Peter's director, saying that he was resigning and leaving his job, handing the director an envelope with his resignation letter. The principal crumpled up the envelope and started yelling at Alfie. He told him to stop it and explain what he meant by doing all this, why he wanted to quit, as if there was no reason. Gary started to panic so that the principal wouldn't start yelling at him too, so he reminded him that their school didn't allow him to fill out the internship report. He began to reassure him that it was not a big deal, on the contrary, it was rude of the young man to just announce his resignation. The director didn't listen to the worker. He started shouting at him to come back immediately, scaring him that he wouldn't get away with it so easily. He still has Alf's internship report. He decided to put pressure on the guy with it, because wasn't it important to him? He asked if he didn't want to get his job, get his diploma. In response to all these threats, the guy said that the director could do as he pleased. Alfie is now rich and he is determined to start his own business. The director wanted to say something else, but he was interrupted by a phone call. As it turned out, it was his secretary who called him, and the call did not bring any good news, judging by the director's reaction. His face twisted with surprise mixed with anger. The secretary said that he was looking for an intern named Alfie because he had come to pick him up and was waiting for him. The director stammered and explained that Alfie had just quit his job because he had insulted the director before he left. The workers started whispering while their boss was on the phone. When he finished speaking, he started yelling at Gary and ordered him to bring Alfie back, to make him come back. He told him not to come back without the intern, also threatening him with his internship report. He was yelling at all the workers to bring him back, and it looked like he was about to fire with his mouth like a dragon. They almost caught up with Alfie as they ran, shouting at him to stop. He thought something had happened, started to turn around, and was in total shock at what he saw. There were about 10 good people running after him, asking him to stop and come back to the hangar with them. The boy saw a group of people chasing him, and gave himself a whipping. As he ran away, he could not understand why the principal was doing this, whether it was really necessary to gather so many people to beat him up. But they never managed to catch up with the young man. He deftly ran to the bus and jumped on it right before it left. The boy took an empty seat, and while sitting down he was proud of his agility, making fun of his colleagues. It was not for nothing that he took third place in the 5,000-meter race at the school's sports club. While riding the bus, he suddenly received a phone call. It turned out to be Emily's sister, and when the guy picked up the phone, he asked her what was wrong and why she had called him. As it turned out, The sister was worried about the young man. Having heard that he had quit his job, she asked Alfie what had prompted him to do so. Alfie was surprised that she already knew about it, but how did she know? The guy started complaining that he had quit his job because there was a colleague there who was causing him problems and trouble, so he just decided to cause trouble for them. He also said that his boss and his people wanted him to come back, but he convinced her that they would not be able to catch him, because there was no telling what they would do to him if he came back. The sister laughed at the situation. Emily told him that she was the general manager of the Sunward Group, and she explained that he really wanted to get the guy back. She invited him to come to her office and together they would choose the right job for him. Alfie was shocked by this news. When he entered his sister's office, he was uncomfortable in front of her and addressed her as a manager, which amused her, and she allowed him to address her as a sister when no one else was around. Sitting down in the chair, the boy said that there was no need for her to find a job for him, as he wanted to start his own business and not work for someone else. The pink-eyed girl was surprised by this, but she advised him not to rush, since he had only recently graduated. It was too early to think about his business. He should first gain experience in this work, then practice for about 2 years, and only then start opening his own business. It's for his own good, but if he really wants to start a business, that's great. If Alfie does decide to start a career, in case of any problems, he can call his sister Emily without hesitation. She also told the guy that Madison wanted to meet him and go out for lunch, but she was at Jiqiang's fitness center. The guy understood and thanked her for everything. It was time for the boy to leave. He promised that when he really needed her help, he would contact her immediately, and said that he had to go. His sister stood up too, saying that when she had some free time, she would invite him to dinner. Alfie beamed at this wonderful news. Alfie went straight to his sister Madison's gym. When he walked in, he didn't expect to see martial arts training, and he was the teacher. She was training the boys, using her stern facial expressions and voice to discipline the students. Alfie went up to his sister and told her that he had arrived, drawing her attention to him. The sister was happy to see him and asked him if he had a good trip, as it had taken him a long time to get here. She called him to come with her to change into her uniform and try to fight her in kung fu style. The boy showed his reluctance, saying that it was not necessary. The sister looked at the boy with displeasure and threat in her eyes, and this look made him immediately agree to the fight. Soon they were standing in the ring, dressed in their new clothes, striking fighting stances and preparing for the fight. The young man was surprised that his sister had such a strong competitive spirit. Madison appreciated Alfin's calmness, but warned him not to relax and to keep his eyes open. Maddie attacked first. She was unexpected and agile as a snake. She swung her leg, aiming for the head, a dangerous aura enveloping her, and during the fight she became different, tougher. The young man barely managed to dodge this attack. Maddie struck one after another, but the boy easily dodged them. The students had already started discussing the teacher's friend. They had seen him deal with it. They had no idea he would be so good. He dodged all of Coach Madison's attacks. So it was no surprise that she didn't spare him and was so strict with him. Alfie told his sister that he could just give up, because this fight was nothing serious. Maddie refused, saying that he could not just go down without a fight. Being the man he was, he had to show all his courage and give her a great fight. He would not run away from her anyway. A voice came from the audience, indicating that he liked the mood. The girl turned irritably to see who it was that couldn't keep his mouth shut. It was a healthy, muscular man, and he began to say that he had heard there was a woman named Madison in the Jinyan Hall, and that she had already defeated many kung fu masters in Chang'an. His appearance was rugged. He had a mustache and brown hair. He had come here to pay his respects and to test the news on his own skin, so he asked to show her. Maddie asked him who he was, for interrupting the fight so unceremoniously. He realized that it was the same woman talking to him, so he immediately said hello and told her his name, Noah. He works as a Muay Thai instructor at the Shuanghua gym, and Maddie was fascinated by Noah, and he complimented her on her beauty, saying she was as beautiful as a flower. The trainer's students recognized the man. They had heard that he was from Thailand, that he had won second place in a Thai Muay Thai tournament, and that he was unbeatable in his field. She accepted the man's offer and was ready for the fight. A strong and healthy man appeared in the ring to replace Alfie. The students of the two coaches stood on opposite sides and cheered for each other. The girl's students shouted words of support and said she was the best at it. Because he had challenged her, she had to show him a lesson in the ring. On the other side were Noah's students, urging the instructor to calm this woman down and show her how powerful men can be. Alfie was standing closest to the ring. He knew that things were going to be tough. He could see that it would be hard for his sister Maddie in this unequal battle. Madison gave the command to act and began to attack Noah. He huffed in frustration and kicked her in the leg. She commented that it was a good trick and ordered him to continue the fight. She kept striking at the burly man, and he either deflected or defended all the blows. He said that he didn't know if she had any other tricks left, and that it was his turn to attack. His face immediately changed. It became even more fierce and furious. It stood out sharply. His pupils shrank and his eyes gleamed with excitement. He was aiming to attack Maddie's chest, but she managed to put up a defense, and it didn't improve the situation, because Noah's strength was like nothing human. The kick made the girl move on her feet around the ring. It was a great kick. The students said that this instructor was really fierce. It was an unequal fight for their trainer, at least in the power category, that's for sure. Alfie was watching all this. As expected, his sister was no match for him. Now he just had to hope for luck. The man stood there pleased with himself because he thought the battle was over and he had won. But the woman spoke up, saying that he would only defeat her in his dreams, and that she was not in good shape today because of her womanhood, but she promised that she would bring the naive man back to earth. The young man was surprised that Madison's sister could use such mean tricks. He immediately realized that she just wanted to get away with it. The boy wanted to look into the future, to know how the situation would turn out for Maddie, and his expression changed immediately, which portended not very pleasant actions. She pointed at Alfie and explained that her youngest would fight him instead of her, because she was not in a position to fight. Because he has the same strength level as her, if the Nightingale defeated the boy, Madison would count it as a defeat. The boy's face said it all. He didn't want that. Noah agreed, but if he couldn't do anything against him either, then she should put a sign on the door that said, "Not as good as the Shuanghua gym." Although, the Shuanghua trainer suggested with more enthusiasm that if the boy was defeated, she would become Noah's girlfriend. The girl laughingly set him a condition that he first win this match with the smaller man, and only then would they talk about the trophy. She brought Alfie into the ring and told him that she would become his girlfriend if she defeated him, so her brother would have to deal with it instead. As her happy future was now in the young man's hands, she told him to behave like a real man so as not to disappoint his sister. The boy perked up at these words, standing there with rosy cheeks and confused eyes. The coach yelled at him to stop wagging his tongue and standing around and start fighting. He rushed at the boy like a bull at the color red, angry and uncontrollable. The young man dodged the huge and muscular fist, gritting his teeth. The teacher started shouting at the man to be ashamed of himself for behaving so meanly, but he missed, fortunately. She yelled at Alfie, encouraging him to beat the coach. The guy made a face at such words of support. He thought it was not too late to avoid the fight, but it was useless. She motivated his opponent even more. Noah was delivering confident, lightning-fast attacks, but Alfie was only dodging without hitting his opponent. The man admitted that the boy was holding up well, but dodging was not enough. He wanted a real fight. His eyes burned with anticipation of the young man's actions. Maddie also urged him to use force and beat him, saying that she had made up her mind and if he ended up winning, they would go and get married right after the fight. The student who was standing next to her was shocked by her sudden, even a little stupid, words. But it had a better effect on the young man. He had to win at least for this reason. The young man had already started to turn on his brain and think about how to defeat him. Otherwise, if he didn't, the coach would definitely leave him with one eye with his power. The first to react was a man, who shouted at the boy that if he was not going to attack, he would continue to beat him until he did. Alfie saw that he had lost control of his emotions and realized that this was his only chance. He just needed to dodge and strike back. The boy prepared to execute his plan. He acted confidently. Even though he was half the size of his opponent, he looked dangerous. And now the time came. The boy dodged and attacked as planned. His actions were successful. He struck the giant's beard from the bottom up, and he fell back. He lay there shivering, his eyes rolled back in fury, and his teeth bared. And above him stood Alfie, fists still clenched, in disbelief that the fight was over, his sister in the audience shouting to him that it was amazing. After 5 seconds of silence, the room erupted in shouts. Everyone was amazed and happy. They did not expect the guy to win. And then he knocked out the bull trainer with one blow, which it would seem that 3 people could not overcome. They were surprised that for such a body, he had amazing strength. Sister Maddie praised the boy, who was sitting on the bench with rosy cheeks, resting, stroking his head, saying that he was a great fighter like her. So now it was time for them to get dressed. Alfie didn't understand why the teacher would need to change if she hadn't finished her class yet. She smiled at him, somehow not cheerfully, and reminded him of the promised wedding, saying that they had to change clothes and arrange a wedding photo shoot. The guy choked on water and his face turned red like a tomato. He panicked, wondering what kind of wedding they could be talking about if they were like brother and sister. The girl calmed the guy down, explaining that it was a joke. After changing her clothes, she wants to take her friend out to dinner and treat him. The boy and the girl entered the shopping center. The girl asks the boy why he hasn't looked in her direction since they changed clothes and left the gym. Did he really think his sister was a beautiful woman? But he was only embarrassed and did not answer. They went to a clothing store and started shopping. Alfie wore a classic black suit, a white shirt, and a dark blue patterned tie. He looked great. This suit suited him. It added to his charm. Her sister believed that men in any clothes looked good, but men in a decent suit were simply irresistible. Maddie told her brother not to take off his suit because she would buy it for him. The saleswoman agreed with the girl. The boy had a good look and a good body, so all clothes would look good on him. Alfie asked her not to buy such an expensive suit for him. But she ignored his request and said that as his sister, she would not save money for him. She turned to the saleswoman and asked her to choose a card payment. The total amount of the items is 320,000 yuan. The original price was 330,000, but now the store is having a promotion, so they will get a 10,000 discount. Alfie's lower jaw dropped when he saw how expensive the girl bought him a suit. Madison asked for one small favor in return for being so good to him. The guy agreed without a problem, as long as it was not something that was beyond the pale. She asked that her brother pretend to be her boyfriend. The boy was caught off guard with this proposal, and was confused, but he agreed. Later, Madison was sitting at a table with a young man in a cozy and beautiful cafe. The stranger was very handsome. He had brown eyes and black hair, and he wore glasses and an elegant suit. A man came to their table with a beautiful bouquet of peonies and spoke to the charming Madison, saying that she looked mesmerizing. It was Alfie. The girl gave him the sweetest smile, while her interlocutor looked at them indignantly, not understanding what was happening. Alfie introduced himself as Maddie's boyfriend. He was very busy and could not inform the girl's family. He did not expect that she would be arranged a blind date. When he told the young man, he apologized to him and hoped he would understand. The guy with the glasses said hello and told him his name, Philip. He asked what his companion's boyfriend did for a living. Alfie began to tell her that he had finished his studies abroad and was now planning to start his own business. As he spoke, he hoped that he was doing the right thing. Madison apologized to young Philip for the situation, explaining that it was her family who had forced her to go out with him. She asked him to think of it as a friendship date. She was pleased with her brother's performance. He was doing very well. The meeting was a success. Alfie was already getting into a taxi when his sister Maddie started asking him if he had any plans for tonight, because she had no classes today, so she was completely free. Realizing that she was flirting with him, he quickly said goodbye and told her that he had a lot to do. The girl frowned in displeasure, wondering if she was really that unattractive. Alfie arrived at a meeting with his friend William. Sitting in the car, Will began to ask what kind of clothes he was wearing with a sly smile. The rich man recalled how he used to call him a show-off, although he looks the same now. The friend asked him to hold on when they got to the place they were going to, because of his appearance he was afraid of being ignored by people around him, and even more so by women, all in jest. Alfie wasn't too surprised and joked about his friend's creativity that his friend had chosen to come to the Gaming Stones for a blind date. But the Major didn't come to this place for a date, he was going to pick up a couple of girls here, which is why he looked so peculiar today. Before he left, Will gave recommendations on how to spend the time. He said that Alfie could go for a walk somewhere while he looked for a girl, and later the rich man would contact him. He didn't want to repeat the same thing again, but he asked him not to get involved in gambling, because sometimes it can create big problems. There were exhibition stones everywhere, and a young man walked among the tables and examined these exhibitions. He believed that with his left eye, which sees through everything, he could play this game without straining. The boy's spirits were raised by such an easy way to make a lot of money at once, so he activated his eye and began to examine the stone. Alfie began to look for the right stone in different areas. This stone, it has only small fragments of jade, it is not suitable. The other one is not suitable either, because there is only a drop of jade. That one has a lot of other materials, the other one is not good enough. The guy was looking for what he needed for a long time. But when he finally found it, he was eager to test it. He called the seller and asked him to get the stone he had chosen. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind him and addressed Alfie. It was a guy with glasses, Philip. He said it was a great coincidence that they met for the second time, and asked what the boy's purpose was. The young man agreed that it was a coincidence, and now he knew where the man worked. Philip asked if Aleph knew anything about gemstones. He answered that he knew almost nothing about them and asked if the game of stones was not dependent on luck. The guy with glasses assured him that if you think about it that way, you can make a big mistake, even though it is called gambling, but there is a certain system. He emphasized that Alfie, although a guy with money, was better off with insurance. In his mind, the glasses-wearing boy thought, "What an ignorant young man, he doesn't understand anything at all." He wondered why the girl, Maddie, was dating someone like him. The man decided to act sarcastically, because if he did not teach him a lesson now, he would not have other opportunities and would not be able to calm down. Their conversation was interrupted by the seller. He wanted to make sure that the buyer was going to cut the stone. The young man confirmed his intentions, and the irrepressible Philip began shouting to Alfie whether he was listening to what he was saying, and if the young man cut the stone, he would be very sorry, his friend warned. But the boy also did not hold back and began to raise his voice to the guy from the date. He said that it was his money and his choice, he had the right to do whatever he wanted, so what did the black man have to do with it? Isn't Philip a little too intrusive, sticking his nose in other people's business? Philip mockingly told Alfie to come down from heaven to earth and offered to bet with him. If there was no jade in the stone, the young man would have to kneel before the spectacle and ask for forgiveness. Alfie didn't mind playing this game with him, but if the stone contained jade, Philip would have to do the same. Both men agreed to their agreements. But Philip was serious, because the young man had taken his girlfriend away from him, so he was not going to lose the argument.